In 1925, a family of 7 on Hester Street lived in 2 rooms and fed everyone on what a single chicken could give. Not the meat was for the Sabbath. They lived on everything else. Today we call it nose to tail and pay $40 for it. Back then, it was just Tuesday. Number 14 on this list was so strange that uptown reporters called it peasant food, unfit for Americans. Yet it kept tenement children alive through brutal winters. And number 3 holds an ingredient the most expensive restaurants in New York now serve as a delicacy. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 25 shocking dishes Jewish immigrants actually ate when nobody was looking. Number 25, Mamaliga. Before the Italians on the block made polenta sound fancy, the Romanian Jews on the Lower East Side made Mamaliga. And they made it because cornmeal was the cheapest thing a pushcart sold. A few cents bought enough yellow meal to feed a whole family. Your great-grandmother would boil water in a heavy pot, rain the cornmeal in with one hand while stirring with a wooden spoon in the other, and keep stirring until her arm ached and the mush pulled away from the sides. Then she poured it onto a board and cut it with a string because a knife would drag. Hot, it was eaten soft with a little sour cream, or a knob of butter if there was butter. Cold and leftover, it was sliced and fried until the edges crisped. It filled the stomach completely and cost almost nothing. The children never knew it was a poor food. They only knew it was warm. Number 24, Eschav. In the spring, when sorrel pushed up green and sour and free along the edges of any vacant lot, the women made chaff. They washed those tart leaves, simmered them in water with an onion until they collapsed into a pale green broth, then chilled the whole pot on the windowsill or in the icebox if the family had one. Served cold with a boiled potato sinking to the bottom, a spoonful of sour cream swirled in, and sometimes a chopped hard egg. It was the soup that announced winter was finally over. The sourness woke up a palate dulled by months of heavy starch. A bunch of sorrel cost pennies, and half the time it cost nothing at all because it grew wild. Downtown on a hot June evening with the windows open and the fire escapes full of people, a cold bowl of chav was the closest thing to luxury that 3 cents could buy. Number 23, the EGG cream. Here is a name that lies to you. An egg cream has no egg and no cream. It never did. The candy store on the corner made it with cold milk, a long squirt of seltzer from the pressurized bottle, and a spoonful of dark chocolate syrup, stirred fast so it foamed up white on top like the head on a beer. For 2 or 3 cents, a kid could stand at the marble counter and drink something that tasted like a treat from a world they would never afford. The seltzer made it fizz on the tongue. The milk made it filling enough to quiet a hungry stomach until supper. Why the name? Nobody fully agrees. Some say the foam looked like beaten egg whites. Either way, the egg cream was the drink of the Jewish Lower East Side, and the people who made it best guarded their syrup to seltzer ratio, like a family secret. Number 22, Pletzel, the onion board. Long before everyone knew the word focaccia, the bakeries on Rivington Street pulled flat rounds of bread from the oven that were dimpled, chewy, and blanketed with soft onions and poppy seeds. They called it Pletzel, sometimes onion board. The dough was the same the baker used for bialys, just rolled flat and crowned with diced onion that had been softened in a little oil so it would not burn, then showered with poppy seeds and coarse salt. It came out the size of a dinner plate, crisp on the bottom, tender in the middle, smelling so strongly of onion that you could find the bakery with your eyes closed. A whole Pletzel cost a nickel and could anchor a meal with nothing but a glass of tea beside it. Workers tore off chunks on their way to the garment factories. It was the cheapest way to put the smell of fresh bread into a tenement kitchen. Number 21, matzo brie. After Passover, every household had broken sheets of matzo left in the box, and nothing in that house was ever thrown away. So the matzo became breakfast, and breakfast became something the children begged for the rest of the year. Your grandmother would break the matzo into rough pieces, run them under water, or soak them in milk just long enough to soften without going to mush, then squeeze out the excess, beat in a couple of eggs, and fry the whole thing in a pan slicked with schmaltz or butter. Some families made it loose and scrambled. Some pressed it flat into a pancake and browned both sides. Then came the argument that split families for generations: salt or sugar, salt and pepper for the savory camp, sugar, cinnamon, or a smear of jam for the sweet. A few eggs and some leftover matzo fed everyone, and it cost next to nothing because the matzo was already paid for. It was thrift turned into something the family fought to finish. Number 20. Sour pickles from the barrel. Down on Essex Street, the pickle men stood over wooden barrels of brine that had been fermenting for weeks, and for 1 penny a child could fish out a pickle with their bare hand and walk away happy. These were not the bright vinegar pickles in a supermarket jar. These were cucumbers cured slow in salt water, garlic, and dill, sitting in the cold until the brine turned cloudy and alive with fermentation. A full sour took a month and tasted of garlic all the way through. A half sour was younger, still crisp and green at the center. Families bought them by the handful because they were cheap, they lasted, and a sour pickle could make a plain piece of bread feel like a meal. And here is the part nobody talks about now. The fermentation made them full of the good bacteria that doctors charge money for today. The pickle men did not know the science. They just knew the barrel worked. Number 19. Black bread with nothing. This was the meal that said the money was gone and payday was still days away. A dense, dark loaf of pumpernickel or sour rye, the kind that weighed like a brick and stayed fresh for a week, cut into thick slices and eaten plain. If there was a scrape of schmaltz, that was a good night. If there was an onion to rub across the crust, that was a celebration. The bread itself carried the meal, deeply sour, faintly sweet from the molasses in the dough, chewy enough that you had to work for every bite, which made a small amount feel like a lot. A whole loaf cost around 7 cents and could feed a family for 2 days if it had to. The garment workers carried slabs of it wrapped in newspaper to eat at their machines. The children dunked it in tea. There was no shame in it because every family on the block was eating the same dark bread, and everyone understood exactly what week it had been. First pattern break. Here is where the truth about this food gets real. You cannot understand any of these dishes without understanding the kitchen they came from. A tenement flat on the Lower East Side in 1925 might hold a family of 8 in 3 small rooms with a single coal or gas stove that did double duty heating the apartment. There was rarely an icebox. The street outside was a wall of push carts, thousands of them, and that street was the refrigerator, the supermarket, and the social club all in one. Food was bought in tiny amounts, daily, because there was nowhere to store it and no money to buy ahead. Every single thing was stretched, saved, and used twice. Nothing, and I mean nothing, was wasted. That was not a lifestyle choice. It was survival, and it shaped every recipe on this list. Number 18. Lokshen Kugel. When there was a little extra, when it was Friday and the Sabbath was coming, the noodle pudding appeared. Lokshen Kugel started with egg noodles, boiled and drained, then bound together with eggs and whatever the family could afford to make it rich. A little schmaltz, some sugar, sometimes raisins, sometimes a handful of cinnamon. The mixture went into a greased pan and baked until the top turned dark and crackling, and the inside set into something between a casserole and a cake. The corners, crisped and chewy, were fought over at the table. It could be served sweet as a dessert or plain as a side to the chicken, and either way it stretched a small amount of noodles into something that felt like abundance. The genius was in the eggs and the bake. which turned a humble bowl of pasta into a centerpiece. Made on Thursday night, it sat ready for the Sabbath when no cooking was allowed. The smell of it baking told the whole hallway that someone's week had gone all right. Number 17, kasha varnishkis. Buckwheat groats, called kasha, were one of the cheapest grains a family could buy, and they came to America in the pockets and memories of Jews from Russia and Poland. To make kasha varnishkis, your great-grandmother toasted the groats in a dry pan, sometimes with a beaten egg, coating each grain so they would stay separate, then steamed them soft. She fried onions slowly in schmaltz until they were deep brown and sweet, boiled up some bow-tie noodles, and tossed it all together. The result was nutty, savory, and filling in a way that stuck with you through a long, cold day. The buckwheat had a flavor unlike anything else, earthy and almost smoky from the toasting. A pound of kasha cost very little and swelled to feed many. Today, nutritionists call buckwheat a complete protein packed with minerals, and they sell it in health food stores at a premium. The immigrant cooks did not know about complete proteins. They knew kasha was cheap, it stored well, and it kept their families on their feet. Number 16, borscht. Most Americans, if they have heard of borscht at all, think of something strange and violently purple. To the Jewish families of the Lower East Side, it was simply soup, and it was everywhere. Beets were one of the cheapest vegetables on the pushcart, sold by the bunch with the greens still attached. The cook would simmer them with onion and a little sour salt until the broth turned a deep, glowing red, sweet, and sour at the same time. In summer, it was served cold, with a boiled potato dropped in steaming so the hot and the cold met in the bowl. A spoonful of sour cream clouding the surface, and a chopped hard egg on top. In winter, it came hot and heartier, sometimes with cabbage and a piece of cheap flanken cooked in for flavor. For pennies a bunch, the beet became supper, and that vivid red bowl was the taste of the old country carried across the ocean. Number 15, stuffed cabbage. Here was the dish that made a quarter pound of meat feed a whole family and feel like a feast. The cook took a head of cabbage, cored it, and dropped it whole into boiling water until the outer leaves were soft enough to peel away without tearing. Each leaf became a wrapper for a filling of rice, patted out with just a little ground meat, an onion, and an egg to hold it. The bundles were rolled tight, packed into a pot, and simmered for hours in a sauce of tomatoes turned sweet and sour with sugar and sour salt, sometimes with raisins thrown in. The rice swelled and soaked up the sauce. The cabbage went silky, and a small amount of meat flavored every single bite. Different families called it holishkis, prakas, or just stuffed cabbage. A head of cabbage cost a few cents, and the dish stretched for days, tasting better each time it was reheated. Number 14, pizza. Here is the dish that horrified the uptown visitors and held the Lower East Side together. Pizza was made from calf's feet, one of the cheapest, most overlooked things at the butcher. The part most Americans threw to the dogs. The cook scrubbed the feet, simmered them for hours with garlic, onion, and bay until all the collagen melted out of the bones and cartilage into the water. The meat and soft bits were picked off, the garlic was crushed, slices of hard-boiled egg were arranged in the dish, and then the whole thing was poured over and left in the cold to set. What it set into was a savory, garlicky, trembling jelly, served cold in slices or scooped onto bread. The texture stopped first-timers dead. It quivered. But for the people who grew up on it, pizza was deeply loved, rich with garlic, satisfying in a way nothing else was, and almost free to make. The butcher practically gave the feet away. Out of garbage, the immigrant cook made a delicacy that families still argue about today. Second pattern, break. Here is what modern nutrition science is only now catching up to. The people boiling calf's feet and chicken necks and beef lungs were practicing what wellness brands now sell as nose-to-tail eating, and they were doing it out of pure necessity. That jellied calf's foot was nearly pure collagen and gelatin, the exact thing now sold in expensive powders for joints and skin. The organ meats they could not afford to waste, the liver, the lungs, the hearts, were packed with iron B12 and vitamin A in concentrations that no muscle meat can match. The bones simmered for broth gave up minerals that built strong children in crowded apartments with little sunlight. These families had no laboratories and no studies. They had hunger and tradition turned out to be smarter than the science that replaced it. Number 13. Kishke. Kishke might be the most honest food on this list because the name simply means intestine, and that is exactly what it was. The cook bought beef casings from the butcher, cleaned them carefully, and stuffed them with a mixture of flour or matzo meal, grated onion, carrot, and a generous amount of schmaltz for richness. The filled casing was tied off and either roasted on its own until the outside crackled, or, more often, tucked right into the pot of Sabbath stew to cook slow alongside everything else. Sliced into thick rounds, kishke was crisp outside and soft and savory inside, the schmaltz keeping it moist and rich. The butcher sold the casings for almost nothing because nobody fancy wanted them. The immigrant cook saw a wrapper waiting to be filled and made it the star of the holiday table. Number 12, Helzel. Nothing from the chicken was wasted, and the neck proved it. The skin of the neck was carefully removed in one piece, like peeling off a glove, and sewn shut at one end with thread to make a long pouch. Into that pouch went the same kind of filling as kishke, flour or matzo meal, grated onion, salt, pepper, and plenty of schmaltz. The other end was stitched closed, and the whole stuffed neck was roasted or simmered until the skin browned and crisped, and the filling inside turned soft and savory. This was Helzel, and it was a small marvel of using every scrap. The neck, which most cooks today drop straight into the trash or the stock pot, became a deliberate dish, planned for and looked forward to. It was rich from the rendered skin, comforting from the soft stuffing, and it stretched the bird even further than seemed possible. A chicken in those days was expensive and bought live from the pushcart, so the family was determined that nothing on it would go uneaten, right down to the skin of the neck. Number 11. Lungen. Here is one that has vanished so completely most people do not believe it was ever eaten. Lungen was a stew made from beef or calf lungs, one of the cheapest organs at the butcher, sold for a few cents a pound because the wealthy would not touch it. The cook cleaned the spongy lung, cut it into pieces, and stewed it long and slow with onions, a little flour to thicken the gravy, and sometimes the heart and other odds and ends thrown in. The texture was unusual, light and porous, soaking up the gravy like a sponge, which is exactly why families loved it, because a small amount of meat tasted like a lot. Often it was paired with milts in a dish the pushcart vendors sold ready-made to workers who had no time to cook. Health regulations and changing tastes eventually pushed lung off the market entirely in America. But for the immigrant family counting every penny, luncheon was a hot, filling supper that the butcher had practically given away. Number 10, chopped liver. Now we come to a dish that survived and even climbed uptown, but began as pure thrift. Chicken livers were a byproduct, the small organs that came with the bird, too few and too humble to be a meal on their own. So the cook gathered them, sautéed them in schmaltz with onions, cooked down until brown and sweet, then chopped the whole thing fine, traditionally with a hand chopper in a wooden bowl, working it together with chopped hard-boiled egg and more schmaltz until it turned into a rich, smooth spread, spread thick on rye or a piece of matzo. chopped liver tasted far more expensive than it was, because the liver was nearly free and the onions and eggs cost pennies. The schmaltz and gray beans folded in gave it a depth that made it a centerpiece at every celebration. People who would never eat a plain liver devoured this without a thought. It was the alchemy the immigrant kitchen specialized in, taking the part nobody wanted and making it the dish everyone reached for first. Number 9, gefilte fish. Gefilte fish gets laughed at today. The jar on the supermarket shelf, the gray ovals and cloudy jelly. But you have to understand where it came from to understand why it mattered. Fresh fish like carp, whitefish, and pike were sold live from tanks on the push carts, and a whole fish was expensive. Gefilte fish was the way to make one fish feed a crowd. The cook ground the flesh fine, mixed it with onion, egg, and a little matzo meal to stretch it, seasoned it, often with a pinch of sugar in the style brought from Poland, then poached the patties in a broth made from the bones, heads, and skin so nothing was lost. As that broth cooled, the natural gelatin set it into the jelly that surrounds the fish. It was served cold with a fierce dab of horseradish that cleared your sinuses. The whole purpose was economy, turning one costly fish into many servings while wasting not a scale of it. What looked strange now was simply the cleverest way to put fish on a poor family's holiday table. Third pattern break. Here is something the modern grocery store does not want you to think about. Almost every dish on this list was killed by convenience, not by taste. The families making gefilte fish from a live carp, rendering their own schmaltz, fermenting their own pickles in a barrel, were not doing it for fun. They did it because there was no other option, and the food was extraordinary precisely because every step was done by hand with care. Then came the jar, the can, the frozen package. The companies promised to free women from the labor, and they did, but they also quietly replaced the real thing with a pale imitation and charged money for it. We traded a kitchen full of skill for a shelf full of products, and we told ourselves it was progress. The recipes did not get worse. We just stopped making them, and a generation forgot they were ever real. Number 8, cholent. The Sabbath created one of the cleverest dishes in the entire Jewish kitchen, born from a single rule that no cooking could be done from Friday sundown to Saturday night. So the cook made cholent, a thick stew assembled Friday afternoon and left to cook all night and into the next day at the lowest possible heat. Into the heavy pot went dried beans, barley, potatoes, an onion, and a cheap cut of meat, often flanken or a marrow bone, with a piece of kishke tucked in if the family had one. It was sealed up and set on a low flame, or, in the old country, carried to the baker who kept it in his cooling oven overnight for a small fee. By Saturday noon, after 16 or 18 hours, everything had melted together into something dark, rich, and deeply savory. The beans creamy, the meat falling apart, the barley swollen and tender. It cost very little. It solved a religious problem, and it filled the house with an aroma that haunted the hallway all morning. Slow cooking before anyone had a slow cooker. Number 7, tzimmes. In a diet built mostly on starch, salt, and fat, tzimmes was where the sweetness lived. The cook took carrots, the cheapest sweet vegetable available, sliced them into coins, and simmered them slowly with dried fruit, usually prunes, sometimes raisins, a little honey or sugar, and often a sweet potato or a piece of cheap meat to make it a main dish. Cooked long enough, the carrots went soft and candied, the prunes plumped up, and the whole thing turned into a glistening, sweet, sticky stew. It was traditional at the New Year, when sweetness symbolized hopes for the coming year, but it appeared any time the family wanted something that felt like a treat without the cost of one. For children raised on dark bread and herring, a bowl of warm, sweet carrots and prunes was as close to dessert as most weeknights got, and it cost only a handful of cents. Number 6, knishes. The knish was the perfect street food, and the Lower East Side ran on it. A kenish was a pocket of thin dough wrapped around a filling, most often mashed potato seasoned heavily with fried onion, though kasha and other fillings were sold too. The bakeries and pushcart vendors made them in huge numbers, and a worker could buy one hot for a nickel and have a complete filling meal he could eat with one hand on the way to the factory. Inside, the potato was dense, savory, and rich with onion and schmaltz, wrapped in a crust that was crisp outside and soft where it met the filling. It was cheap, portable, and satisfying. Everything a person working 12-hour days needed. They were the fuel of the garment district, eaten standing up, sold faster than they could be made. A potato and an onion, and a bit of dough, turned by skilled hands into something that defined the streets of Immigrant, New York. Number 5. Schmaltz herring. Fourth pattern break. Here is the food that fed the Lower East Side more than any other, and almost no one makes it now. Herring was the cheapest fish in the sea, packed in barrels of salt, sold from the pushcarts for a few cents, and it was on the table constantly because, for a poor family, it was the most affordable way to get fish and protein. The richest, fattiest barrels were called schmaltz herring, schmaltz meaning fat, prized for how oily and full-flavored they were. The cook would soak the salt-cured fillets in water or milk to draw out the harshness, then dress them with sliced onion and a little oil or vinegar, sometimes a slice of apple, sometimes a spoonful of sour cream. Eaten on a piece of black bread, schmaltz herring was a meal in itself, salty, rich, and satisfying. The kind of food that stuck to your ribs through a cold morning. It cost almost nothing, and it was everywhere, in lunch pails, on supper tables, sold ready to eat from the carts. Doctors now praise oily fish for the heart. The herring barrel got there first. Number 4. Gry beans. When a family rendered chicken or goose fat into schmaltz, the fat did not give itself up alone. Left behind in the pan were the bits of skin and onion, fried slowly until they turned deep golden brown, crisp and impossibly savory. These were gry beans, and they were treasure. Nothing was added and nothing was bought. They were simply the glorious byproduct of making schmaltz, the cracklings that came free with the fat. The cook would scoop them out, sprinkle them with salt, and the children would hover. Because warm, gry beans straight from the pan were one of the great snacks of tenement life. They went into chopped liver to deepen it, into kishki, scattered over potatoes or mashed into bread. They were salty, crunchy, and rich beyond reason, the kind of intense flavor that came from concentrating everything good about the chicken's skin into a few small bites. A modern cook throws the skin away. The immigrant cook turned it into the thing the whole family fought over, and it cost not a single extra penny. Number 3, marrow bones. Here is the secret ingredient the most expensive restaurants in New York are rediscovering right now, and the immigrant cook knew it 100 years ago, when a marrow bone could be had cheap from the butcher, often nearly free because the wealthy did not want it. The family did not waste it on the stock pot alone. The bone was roasted until the marrow inside softened and turned to rich, buttery liquid. Then the marrow was scooped out and spread on bread with a little salt. It tasted like the most luxurious thing imaginable, deep and savory and impossibly rich. Yet it came from the part of the animal nobody else valued. More often, the bone went into the coolant or the soup pot, where the marrow melted out and gave the whole dish a body that no amount of cheap meat could provide. Today you will pay a fortune for roasted bone marrow on a fashionable menu, presented as a discovery. The tenement cook on Orchard Street was scooping it onto black bread for pennies, knowing exactly what the rich would later pay to learn. Number 2, the bialy. Everyone knows the bagel. Almost nobody outside the old neighborhoods remembers its quieter cousin, the bialy, and that is a genuine loss. The bialy came from the city of Bialystok in Poland, carried to New York by the bakers who fled it, and it was the everyday bread of the working family. Unlike the bagel, The barley was never boiled, only baked, which made it softer, chewier, and lighter, with a flat depression in the center instead of a hole. Into that center went a spoonful of cooked onion and sometimes poppy seeds, browned in the oven until fragrant. Fresh from the bakery in the morning, still warm, a barley needed nothing but maybe a smear of butter or schmaltz. It cost only a few cents, and it was meant to be eaten that same day, because without the boiling, it went stale fast. The bagel traveled the world and became a frozen supermarket product. The barley, harder to mass produce and meant to be eaten fresh, quietly disappeared from most of America, taking a whole world of flavor with it. Number 1. Schmaltz on black bread. At the very top of this list is something so plain it almost feels wrong to name it, and yet it was the foundation under everything else. A thick slice of dark sour rye or pumpernickel, spread with schmaltz, the rendered chicken or goose fat that was the single most important ingredient in the entire Jewish immigrant kitchen. That was supper for more families on more nights than any other meal on this list. Schmaltz was made at home from the fat trimmed off the bird, melted down slow with onion until it turned golden and rich and could be stored for weeks. Spread over bread, sprinkled with salt, maybe topped with a few dry beans or a slice of raw onion, it became a meal that was warm, filling, and satisfying for almost nothing. In a world before cheap vegetable oil, schmaltz was butter. It was cooking fat. It was flavor. It was survival. It went into the chopped liver, the kishke, the kasha, the matzo brie, and when there was nothing else, it went straight onto the bread. This was the taste of getting through. It was poverty, yes, but it was also love, rendered down to its purest form and spread on a slice of bread for a hungry child who would remember it for the rest of their life. Here is my challenge. Make one of these this week. Just one. The matzo brie, the chopped liver, the kasha varnishkis, or if you are brave, the pitcha. Then come back and tell me if your great-grandmother was only being nostalgic or if she actually knew something we have forgotten. Drop the one you are going to try in the comments. I want to know if the dry beans get more love than the knishes, and whether anyone out there still has a barrel of pickles fermenting on the fire escape. Because these were not just cheap dinners. They were the whole story of how a people crossed an ocean with nothing and fed their children anyway. Your great-grandmother knew. Now you know too.